and it was taken by Rajagopal sir. So, uh, as you know, pain is one of the most common symptoms in patients receiving palliative care, and we should know properly how to manage pain. We have to select medication as per the type of pain and intensity of pain. So today we have Dr. Mary Abraham with us. So Madam is basically she's an anesthetist specializing in neuro anesthesia, and she was also doing interventional pain management. But right now, she is concentrating mainly in palliative care, and she has been associated with Pallium India for a few years. So she will be talking about NSAID, paracetamol, and adjuvant. So welcome, madam, and it's over to you.
Mhm. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you for that warm introduction. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to take this talk for all the participants of this ECO program. And it's nice to see so many people. I think 32 people have joined in. And it's a pleasure to once again take this class for Pallium. And I'm very privileged to be part of this ECO program also. Sunil, can I start my presentation?
Yes,
Uh,
madam.
the PPT hasn't come on yet.
I don't. Can you share the, yeah,
Okay.
put
Uh,
it in PowerPoint? Yeah.
yeah. And first slide, please. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So the broad outline of my talk would be on the basics of the WHO analgesic ladder. And I'll be focusing on the step 1 and step 2 drugs of the WHO ladder. Also, I will talk about neuropathic pain and the adjuvant drugs that are given. Okay. So let's start with the basics of the WHO analgesic ladder. First slide. Next, please. Okay. So this WHO analgesic ladder has been around for 35 years, more than 35 years. It was devised in 1986, and it was based on the recommendation of a group of international experts in palliative care who met together and wanted to find out one way in which we can administer drugs for palliative care all over the world. So they have to make it a very simple tool that can be implemented across the board, right? So that is how this was initially formulated way back in 1986. It has stood the test of time, and even today, we are all following the WHO step ladder. That means it is a very robust tool to manage pain, not only cancer pain, but also in non cancer pain. And it has been translated into 22 languages across the world. And it has really been a big catalyst for the management of pain management. Okay, next, please. So, like I said, it's a very simple tool. It's well validated. Well validated means it has been proven to be effective. And it is basically a very stepwise approach. That is why it's called a ladder to treat cancer pain, depending on its severity, starting from mild pain to severe pain. Okay, now before this ladder, that is before 1986, there were a lot of people dying in unnecessary pain. Why was that? Because people were hesitant to use strong drugs like opioids, which is part of the WHO ladder, because of various reasons. The first reason was there was a lot of drug regulation, associated with opioids. It was not easy to procure them and also to dispense them, right? Because of the very strict regulations that were associated with use of morphine to prevent its abuse and misuse and addiction and things like that. So it was very strict, the handling of morphine. Secondly, people who are taking morphine, they're stigmatized. Oh, that person is on morphine, he will become addict. And even the ones who were giving the opioids also were saying, oh, this doctor is prescribing such strong opioids that, the patients can get addicted to it. So because of all these, people were hesitant in giving opioids like morphine. And so people were dying in pain. Okay. And which was not really necessary. And when this WHO ladder was introduced in 1986, it actually legitimized the use of opioids. Why? Because the WHO itself is giving the approval to give morphine. So there is no harm if you stick to all the guidelines. There is no harm in giving morphine. Otherwise, they will not allow people all over the world to give morphine, right? So it legitimized the use of opioids. So that was a big boost in the pain management, particularly for cancer pain and especially for severe cancer pain. Next, please. Now, before using the ladder, we need to assess pain because it is based on the severity of pain, right? So when you assess pain, not only the severity, but you also have to know whether it is a nociceptive or a neuropathic pain, right? Based on that only you can apply the ladder. Because if there is only purely nociceptive, then you need not give the other drugs along with that. So if it is a neuropathic, then you have to add the anti-neuropathic drugs also. So that is number one. When you see a patient, you have to see whether the pain is nociceptive, neuropathic, or it could be mixed, both nociceptive and neuropathic. Secondly, what is the intensity of pain? Is it mild, moderate, or severe? So for that, we have a unidimensional scale, which is basically, why it's called unidimensional? Because it is only based on the severity of pain and not on the other aspects of pain, right? Because pain has got number of aspects like it's emotional and so many other components, but this is only assessing the intensity or the severity of pain. So we have the visual analog scale, the numerical rating scale. It's basically a simple tool by which you can assess the severity of pain. So we need to assess the pain in both ways, whether it's neuropathic nociceptive and whether it is what is the severity of the pain. Okay, next please. So based on this, this ladder you can apply, right? Now, there are basically three-step ladder. That was what was devised in the beginning in 1986. The step one is for mild pain. That is when the NRS scale is less than 4 or maybe even 5, you know. Okay, so in that you have to just give a non-opioid analgesic along with an adjuvant, depending on whether there are more components to the pain. Adjuvant is given when there is something else besides a nociceptive pain, right? So this is given for the step one. Now, if the patient is not responding to step one and still has a pain score of more than 5, then you have to go to the next step, which is a step two drug, in which the same thing is given, but you have to add a weak opioid. Okay, so I'll talk about these later. And if again it is not responding to this and the patient has a score of more than 5 or 6, then you have to add a supplement the weak opioid with a strong opioid. Acha, adjuvant, right? Okay, I will be talking about adjuvant drugs right at the end. Okay, we'll discuss that then, right? Adjuvant could be many types. I'll talk about it in the end. So if the pain is severe, that is more than 7, okay, then you have to add a strong opioid. They will not respond to even weak opioid. So then you have to give a strong opioid along with a non-opioid with or without an adjuvant, right? So that is how you treat. But it's always not necessary to go through the 3 steps one by one. Sometimes you start off with step one, and then you find that the pain is really severe. You can skip step 2 and go directly to step 3. But this is a very easier way of trying to implement this ladder, right? Okay, next, please. So with using this ladder-based approach to treat pain, 71 to 76% of cancer pain can get satisfactory relief. Okay. There is only a minority of 10 to 15 or 20% who do not get relief using this, however strong the pain is. That means you can even treat a lot of cases of severe pain with using this ladder. But there is still a window which you cannot treat with this WHO analgesic ladder, and that I will talk about later. Next, please. So what are the salient features of the ladder? All palliative care physicians should be familiar with all the steps of the ladder, how it is used, how it is applied, because that forms the very basis of our pain management. So the first important feature of the ladder is all the drugs are given by mouth, that is oral administration. We do not have to give anything, although there are exceptions, you can give it, but it's basically meant for oral administration. That is a standard route, even for the strong opioids like the step 3 drugs. And that has made many it makes very things easy, not only for the caregiver who can give it to the patient at home, but also for the visiting nurse, the domiciliary care team that is going and visiting the patient in their home. They can advise them how to give the drugs, right? Because it is very simple. You have to only explain in detail how to give it. It can be given orally. That's the first major advantage. The second feature of the WHO ladder is the drugs are given by the clock. I mean, by the ladder. By the ladder means, like I mentioned, you start with step one, and depending upon the severity of the pain, you can move up the ladder. So it is a ladder-like approach to giving the drugs, starting from the step one. The third important characteristic is it is given by the clock. That means you have to, it is given according to the duration of action of that drug. For example, you're giving morphine, then the duration of action of the drug is for 4 hours. So you have to repeat the next dose at the end of 4 hours. So you see the clock. You give it at 6 o'clock, the next dose is at 10. The next dose is at 2, then 4, then 10. Or if you take paracetamol, then it's every 6 hours. Or if you take another drug like diclofenac, you can give it every 12 hours. So it depends upon the duration of action of the drug. Why is that? So that if you wait longer than the duration of action, then the breakthrough pain can happen. And all the pain relief you're doing is going down the drain because the patient is again having very severe pain. The idea is to keep the pain under control all 24 hours. Okay. Not allowing pain to come up in between. Like you're not having peaks and valleys. You're keeping it at a plateau. Throughout, you're keeping at a pain score of less than 4 or 5, right? Ideally, it should be 4, less than 4, which is less than, it should be either mild or no pain, right? So that is what it means by giving by the clock. So this has to be explained to the caregiver, and the nurse has to explain very much in detail that do not wait for the pain to come back to give the next dose, but give it according to the clock. The third, next important characteristic is individualized to the patient. For example, one patient can get satisfactory relief with 30 mg morphine, but another person can get relief with maybe about 120 mg morphine. But the right dose is the dose that causes pain relief. It could be low, it could be high, but it is the one that is relieving the pain. That is, so you keep titrating the dose till you get the pain relief. Excuse me. Okay. And also, you have to also tell them that if there is a breakthrough pain, then you have to give another dose of the drug and then recalculate the whole dose. So it is very individualized. You have to titrate it to that particular patient. That is what is called individualized to the patient. Then there is a use of adjuvant drugs also. At every step of the ladder, you can add an adjuvant drug, the details of which I will talk in my last few slides when I will deal with adjuvant drugs. Then you have to pay attention to detail, which means that you have to take the patient's age, the comorbidities of the patient, whether the patient's body weight is, how much is a body weight. You have to maintain the side effect profile. Are the patients having any side effect? So every little detail you have to take it into conjunction to give it very safely. So these are the salient features of the WHO analgesic ladder. Next, please. So what are the advantages? Like I said, simple, very easy to understand, can be given by even the caregiver at home. It's a validated tool. It is not only effective, but it is even cost effective because most of the drugs are relatively inexpensive drugs. It can be implemented across the world, even in the underdeveloped countries. It's well suited for home care, and it's not only applicable for cancer pain, but you can give it even for acute pain. Acute pain is like post-operative pain or pain due to trauma, and also for non-cancer pain, which is chronic non-cancer. Next, please. Now, like I said, you can even sometimes you may have to skip the step 2 and go directly from step 1 to step 3 if the patient is in very severe pain. And sometimes you may even have to add a fourth step if the patient is not responding even to the step 3 drugs. So next, please. Here in this, In 2000, the ladder was modified to add a fourth step. And this is for that 10 to 15% of patients who have intractable pain not responding even to opioids. So in such patients, you may have to give an epidural, or you may have to give a neurolytic block. You may have to give a nerve block or spinal cord stimulators or intrathecal pumps. So there are a lot of advanced interventional therapy that you can give for those patients, which is only a very small fraction, about 15% of patients who are not responding even to oral morphine, which is the strongest among the step 3 drugs, right? So this is the modification of the analgesic ladder. Okay, next, please. Now let's discuss step 1 drugs. So this is, like I said, used to treat mild to moderate pain, which is less than, say, 5 out of 10, right? And these drugs are paracetamol, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and they can be combined with the adjuvant if necessary. Next, please. So paracetamol. Now it's also called acetaminophen in US, okay? Now this drug has got a predominantly central action. It acts in the central nervous system by inhibiting the enzyme cyclooxygenase or COX. It does not have effect on the peripheral cyclooxygenase, unlike the NSAIDs. Okay, so the side effect profile is less. Now, it has an antipyretic and analgesic action, but it does not have an anti-inflammatory action. So when there's associated inflammation, it is not the best drug to give. So the dose, I may not go into too much detail because all of you may be familiar with the dose. Suffice to say that a daily dose should not exceed 4 grams. And a single dose should not exceed 1 gram. The normal dose that we give is 650 mg every 6 hours. Now, it has a potential for hepatotoxicity, but it is still safe in liver disease in a dose up to 2 to 3 grams. It is safe in pediatric use, up to 15 mg per kg we can give. Toxicity occurs only in doses of more than 90 mg per day, per kg per day. The NNT of paracetamol, that is the numbers needed to treat, is 5. So what is its numbers needed to treat? It is, supposing I treat, out of every 5 patients, if I give 650 mg, 5 out of 5 patients get relief. Okay, so that means that it is not a very good NNT. Normally, the NNT should be much lower, right? So it is, but despite that, because of its good safety profile, it is still given. And it can be given rectally also, but that is only when the oral route is not feasible. Next, please. So like I said, the advantages, that is why what it makes it so popular among the palliative care physicians. It has got a good safety profile, no adverse effects on gastric mucosa. So it's well tolerated in patients with peptic ulcer. It has no renal effects, which are adverse effects, no effect on platelet function. Numbers needed to treat. NNT is the numbers needed to treat. Okay. And it is tolerated by even those who are allergic or hypersensitive to aspirin. And it does not affect the plasma uric acid level. So it can be given even in patients with gout. Next, please. But the drawbacks. The drawbacks is, like I said, the NNT is 5. It is not a very, very potent analgesic. And it does not have anti-inflammatory action also. That is one of the drawbacks. It also,
I will give you the form.
The duration of effect action is only for 6 hours. That means it has to be given every 6 hours, and it has a potential for hepatotoxicity. So that means high doses, particularly, it can cause hepatotoxicity. And especially for those who are taking alcohol of more than 3 drinks a day, and those whose body weight is less than 50 kg, you must restrict the total dose to only 2 grams. Okay, so these are the drawbacks of paracetamol. Next, please. In cancer pain, it is very important because it is one of the mainstay drug. It can be given at every step of the ladder, and it has a good safety profile, and it also has an opioid sparing effect. Like when you're giving it with morphine, it can even decrease the dose of morphine that you're giving. Then secondly, it can be added at every step of the ladder. It can be added to step 1 drug, if you add it to NSAIDs, the NNT actually improves to 2. It can be added to tramadol, it can be added to opioids. So it can be added at every step of the ladder. Next, please. Now coming to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now, like I said, unlike paracetamol, this acts on the peripheral cyclooxygenase enzyme. Now, this is a very important enzyme which acts at the arachidonic acid cascade, which ultimately produces prostaglandins, and prostaglandins are one of the inflammatory mediators of pain. Okay, so and it also causes peripheral sensitization. So by acting on this step, it is decreasing the number of the amount of prostaglandins which are actually causing pain. That is how NSAIDs acts. Next, please. Now, cyclooxygenase exists in 2 forms. One is the COX-1, which is present in all normal tissues. It is called the constitutive or the housekeeping enzyme, and it is particularly important to protect the stomach and the kidney, and it facilitates platelet aggregation. So this is important for the body. But there is this COX-2, which is actually causing the change from arachidonic acid. That tissue injury causes release of phospholipids, which produces arachidonic acid. And the COX-2 acts at this level to cause prostaglandin formation, which is actually causing the inflammatory pain, all that. Okay, so COX-2 enzyme, when you inhibit, it is acting in this and preventing the anti-inflammation. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. So you have on one hand the beneficial COX-1, and then you have the one that is causing the pain, which is COX-2. So now let us see how does these NSAIDs act. Next, please. There are 2 types of NSAIDs. The one is a non-selective that is interfering with both COX-1 and COX-2. So it is interfering with the beneficial effect and also with the bad side effect. The second is the one which is only selectively inhibiting the COX-2. So it is preserving the COX-1 effect. That is, the beneficial effect is preserved, but it is only preventing the adverse effects. That is, the anti-inflammatory effect it is causing. So these are the 2 basic types of NSAIDs that are available. Next, please. So let us talk about the non-selective NSAIDs, which are inhibiting both COX-1 and COX-2. The prototypes of these are ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin. Okay. Now, because it is inhibiting COX-1, it is prone to get the adverse side effects because the beneficial effects is not there, the protective effect is not there. So it can cause GI bleeding, it can cause hypersensitivity or allergic reactions. It can also have adverse effects on the kidney. But because it is inhibiting COX-2, the prostaglandin release is decreased. So it has an anti-inflammatory effect, analgesic, and antipyretic effect. So these non-selective NSAIDs is actually a double-edged sword with both adverse and beneficial effects. Next, please. So the prototypes, like I said, are ibuprofen. And I won't go into this because I think we are all familiar, but I only want to tell you the numbers needed to treat is 2. That means for every 2 persons, 1 person is getting benefit, right? And in naproxen also has got a fairly good NNT of 2.7. It is much better than paracetamol. Okay, so these are the non-selective NSAIDs which are very useful and use, but you have to use it very carefully in selected patients only. Next, please. So like I said, the side effects of NSAIDs are because of the inhibition of the COX-1 enzymes, and they are the cardiovascular effects, the renal effects, the gastrointestinal effects, the hypersensitivity reactions. It can also have adverse effects on the liver if the liver function is impaired. Okay, next, please. So we have to be very careful of the which patient are we giving. Like, for example, if it's an advanced age, or if they have got history of upper GI bleed, or they have dehydrated, or they are on already nephrotoxic drugs, or the creatinine clearance is less than 30 ml per minute, then you have to be very careful when using NSAIDs. And for COX-2 drugs, you have to be very careful because they are prone to get stroke and MI. And so you have to be very careful in those patients who have got diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. Be careful when you're using COX-2 drugs. Next, please. Now let's discuss the COX-2 drugs. Like I said, they're only inhibiting COX-2 and not COX-1. So ideally, the beneficial effect of COX-1 is retained. Now, the drugs that are commonly used are etoricoxib, which is commonly called Nucoxia, the brand that we use. So it is given as only a once a day dose, 60 milligram, 90 milligram, or 120 mg. And the other one that is functionally COX-2 inhibitors, diclofenac sodium, which we all are familiar with. It can be given orally or intravenously. The NNT of diclofenac is very good. It is 2. Okay, that means for every 2 persons given diclofenac, 1 person is getting good relief. Right? Next, please. Next. Next, please. Can we change the slide?
Sorry for man, network issue.
Oh, okay, doesn't matter. So like I said, this selective COX-2 drugs like etoricoxib and diclofenac, they are actually supposed to be only COX-2 inhibitor and preserving COX-1 effect. But, okay, we have to go behind. Go behind. Okay. Right. Now, next slide. Okay. Now, NSAIDs can be given topically also. Okay, like we are familiar with all these creams that we are using, which has ibuprofen, diclofenac, piroxicam, and ketoprofen. The advantage is it has analgesic effect because of its absorption into the circulation, but there is less risk of toxicity. So it can be used to supplement the effect of analgesic drug. Next, please. Now, I wanted to tell that are COX-2 inhibitors really safe? Selective COX-2 inhibitors as compared to the non-selective inhibitors? Well, it is only for the GIT that it is safe. That means it can prevent ulcer formation and peptic ulcer formation, but where the renal damage is concerned, it is comparable with non-selective NSAID. So it doesn't really protect the kidneys. But it has got an added side effect is it can be prothrombotic. I mentioned earlier also that those who are history of high risk for getting MI and stroke, or those who already have MI and stroke, then please do not give the selective COX-2 inhibitor because it can be prothrombotic. And in fact, it was because of this that one particular drug, which was rofecoxib, was taken off the market because of the history of because of the causation of stroke and MI. So in such patients, it is safer to give a non-selective NSAIDs like ibuprofen or naproxen in these high-risk cases. Okay, this has to be remembered. So it is not really all that safe in these kind of patients. Next, please. Now we'll come to step 2 drugs. Now, step 2 drugs are the weak opioids. Unlike the strong opioids, they are not controlled drugs. Controlled drugs means it is not coming under the Draconian Narcotic Act. So you can give it easily, more easily than you're giving morphine and all. But it is, remember, it's only a weak opioid. So it is given to pain of only moderate intensity, which are not controlled with step 1. And the examples that we are commonly using are tramadol and tapentadol.
Promotion. Time bound promotion is
So somebody has.
Next, please.
So can you mute who's speaking?
Next, please. Next slide. Okay. Now, tramadol, all of you all are very familiar with, and I'm sure many of you all are using it. So it is basically, it is a synthetic weak opioid. It has a dual mode of action. First of all, because it's a weak opioid, it is a mu opioid agonist. Okay. So, but unlike a strong opioid, less tendency for respiratory depression. Okay. I mentioned why you skip step 2 is supposing the patient is not responding step 1 and having very severe pain. like in a NRS scale of about 7, then there's no point in giving tramadol. You may have to directly go to morphine. That is what I meant by skipping the step 1, because a patient is unbearable pain. You don't want to, keep giving a moderately acting drug, a weak opioid. You may have to go to the next. Okay. Now, the other important way tramadol acts is it is actually blocking the presynaptic uptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. Now, these are the neurotransmitters that are released by the descending inhibitory pathway of pain. So, by blocking the uptake, you have increased concentration of serotonin and norepinephrine, which is actually inhibiting the pain sensation from going upwards. So, that is a dual method of action. Now, its NNT is also not bad. At least it's better than paracetamol. It's around 3.8. Now, because it is blocking this inhibitory pathway, it can be given for neuropathic pain. Because even drugs like antidepressants, like I will talk about later, are also acting on this descending inhibitory pathway by blocking the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. That is why these drugs are very good for neuropathic pain. And we also are very familiar with the use of Ultracet, which is a combination of tramadol and paracetamol. So that combination is widely used in cancer pain as well as other kinds of chronic pain. Next, please. It's got a high oral bioavailability. The oral dose is very potent. It's 1/5 as potent as morphine. And the intravenous dose is, in fact, 1/10 as potent as morphine. So, and even sustained release formulations are available. Like you can give it twice daily or thrice daily. That is tramadol SR, which can be a longer duration of action. So instead of giving every 6 hours, you can give it even twice a day. So that, but just remember that the oral dose is very effective of tramadol. Next, please. Some side effects are there, which is like nausea, vomiting, constipation, somnolence, but that you have to individualize to the patient. The next weak opioid is tapentadol, relatively newer drug. It also is similar to tramadol. It is a mu receptor agonist. It also acts on the descending inhibitory pathway and prevents reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. But the side effect profile is slightly better than tramadol. And again, the dose is very similar, 50 to 150 mg every 6 to 8 hours. And again, sustained release formulation are also available with tapentadol. Next, please. Now I will talk about neuropathic pain. Okay.
Hello, ma'am. Just had one quick question. In comparison with tramadol and tapentadol, which can be much better in case of a step 2 ladder of pain management? Like, how do we see it in patients?
Okay.
Which is much better?
Tramadol could possibly be a little less expensive. It is more freely available. Many people are familiar with the use of tramadol, but in some patients, they can be vomiting, nausea, drowsiness. So side effects may be more than tapentadol, right? So if the patient is not, having a side effects which are relatively more, then maybe you can switch over to tapentadol. Okay. So that is the advantage, but it is more expensive than as compared to tramadol. Otherwise, you can use tapentadol also as a step 2 drug.
Okay, ma'am. And ma'am, efficacy is similar, right? For both
efficacy is similar, yeah. It's like I said, NNT of 3.8 in neuropathic pain. Okay. That means for every 3.8 patients treated, one person will get 50% pain relief. That is what is called NNT.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, welcome. So, like I said, cancer pain is not just nociceptive pain. It's not just due to tissue damage. You can have a neuropathic component. You can have bone pain. You can have bowel obstruction pain. That is spasmodic pain. You can have muscle spasm. You can have so many other symptoms like loss of sleep or, spasticity. So many things can be there. So the adjuvant drug, someone asked me, what is adjuvant drug? Adjuvant drugs are those drugs that are given along with, it is a co-analgesic. That means it's given along with the nociceptive drug so that you can get benefit of all the other facets of cancer pain. Next, please. So they have analgesic properties. But the primary indication may not be for pain. For example, an anticonvulsant. The primary indication may be for seizures, but when you give it for seizure, I mean, it has also got analgesic properties. Or you take, for example, antidepressants. The primary indication is for depression, but it can be effective for neuropathic pain. So they are called co-analgesic because they are co-administered with the other analgesics of the WHO ladder. Okay. So I've got about 10 minutes left. Sunil, I think I'm in keeping good time this time. Huh? Okay.
Okay.
So I'll try to complete at 3:45. Okay, next, please. So these adjuvant drugs are basically of two types, the multi-purpose drugs or the specific type of adjuvant drug. The specific type of adjuvant drugs are given specifically for either neuropathic pain or for bone pain or for musculoskeletal pain or for bowel obstruction pain, whereas the multi-purpose drugs can be given for a wide variety of causes. For example, steroids can be given for intracranial tumors, it can be given for bowel obstruction, it can be given for so many other reasons, right? So antidepressants also can be given for a variety of reasons. So that is how you can basically classify the adjuvant drugs. Next, please. So now let's discuss neuropathic pain. So neuropathic pain is very important. What is neuropathic pain? According to the latest definition of the Indian Association of Study of Pain in 2018, neuropathic pain is caused by a disease or lesion in the peripheral or the central nervous system, because the conduction through the nerves have become awry because of a lesion or a disease in the pain conducting pathways. And that is why the pain is perceived differently as compared to a nociceptive pain. That is a different topic altogether. How does neuropathic pain manifest? So that can be dealt with sometime later, or if you have any doubts, you can ask me later. Now, it's very important because 40% of cancer patients can have neuropathic pain. So it's very important to distinguish whether this patient has neuropathic pain or not, because then you have to add the adjuvant drug. And why does it happen in cancer? It can be because the nerve itself is involved, or there can be compression of the nerves, or it can be because of the treatment of cancer. Chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery where the nerves are damaged, all can cause neuropathic pain. For example, chemotherapy-induced neuropathic pain is very, very common in patients receiving chemotherapy. So that is why you need to know how to treat this neuropathic pain. Next, please. So what are the drugs? The most commonly used drugs in neuropathic pain are the anticonvulsant drugs, the antidepressant drugs. You can use the step 3 drugs, methadone, very important. But even now they have shown that morphine, which was traditionally thought to be good only for nociceptive pain, may be effective even in neuropathic pain. And then, of course, the step 2 drugs, because I said, because it is inhibiting the release of, it is preventing the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, descending inhibitory pathways can actually prevent the neuropathic pain. So step 2 drugs also very important. Other less commonly used drugs are local anesthetic, NMDA antagonists, corticosteroids, GABA agonists. Okay. So the next slide. So we have a neuropathic pain ladder also, in which the step 1 is either an antidepressant or an anti-epileptic. In step 2, you have to combine an antidepressant with anti-epileptic. In step 3, you give an NMDA antagonist also. And in step 4, you may have to give a local anesthetic IV. Okay. So this is how you can do that. So we start off with step 1 drugs, that is anticonvulsants. Okay, I said it is used as a first line of treatment of neuropathic pain. Why is anticonvulsant drug given for neuropathic pain? Because, next please. Next step. Because epilepsy and pain, they have a common pathophysiology. In both, there is neuronal hyperexcitability, and these drugs actually dampen the neuronal excitability and thus decrease pain. And the most commonly used drugs are gabapentin, pregabalin, sodium valproate. Okay. Next. Now, antidepressant. I said this is also a step 1 drug. Either step 1 or it can be even combined with step 2 if the pain is not getting controlled with this alone. Now, the drugs, its primary indication is for depression, but the analgesic effect occurs earlier and at much lower doses as used for depression. Okay, but since patients with pain and cancer pain particularly also have coexisting depression and anxiety and insomnia, giving these antidepressants can have a double effect, not only affecting the pain, but it can also treat the depression, anxiety, and insomnia. And like I said earlier, it acts by acting on the descending inhibitory pathway of pain and thus prevents the pain from going upwards to the nervous system. Next, please. So what are the antidepressants that are commonly used? You can classify as tricyclic antidepressants, which are basically amitriptyline and nortriptyline, or the selective serotonin. It only inhibits the reuptake of serotonin, that is SSRI, which is escitalopram or citalopram or fluoxetine, or the one that prevents the reuptake of both serotonin and norepinephrine, that is SNRI. The commonly used drugs are duloxetine or venlafaxine. Okay, so these are the commonly used drugs of the antidepressant. Next, please. So what are the other drugs that are used in neuropathic pain? Like I said, at the step 3, you can add an NMDA blocker, because NMDA antagonists can actually, because NMDA also is a very important thing for the neuropathic pain to occur. So you can add an NMDA antagonist. The commonly used one is ketamine. Okay, so they act at the dorsal root ganglia by inhibiting the NMDA receptor, because dorsal root ganglia is a major area where the pain is processed, particularly the chronic pain. So at that level, this NMDA blocker will be active. Next, please. So ketamine is normally an anesthetic drug, right? But in analgesia, you need only sub-anesthetic doses. So you give at a very low dose of 0.2 to 0.5 mg per kg. Okay, orally you can give, or you can give us an IV infusion of 0.05, that's about 50 to 100 mg per day. Or you can give us a burst ketamine or a pulse course starting with 100 mg in 24 hours. If it's not responding in 3 days, you increase to 300 mg. Again, and it's not responding to 300 mg, you can give it to 500 mg. Each you have to give it for 3 days. So this pulse ketamine can also be effective for neuropathic pain, particularly that is not responding to the antidepressants and the anticonvulsants. Next, please. The local anesthetic is step 4 of the ladder. So what is a local anesthetic we're using is IV Xylocard. Okay, and that you give it as an infusion of 5 milligram per kg over 1 hour with cardiac monitoring. So it has to be done in a hospital setup, and you can repeat it after every 2 weeks. You can keep repeating this to see whether they are getting control with this. But nowadays, even topical local anesthetic patches, 5% lidocaine patches are available. Now it's available in India, and that can also be used to treat neuropathic pain, particularly when it's localized to some area, like, for example, breast cancer or something like that. You can use these 5% lidocaine patches. It will have much more safety profile as compared to the IV Xylocaine that we use. Next, please. Now, corticosteroids. Like I said, this is a multi-purpose drug. Why I said multi-purpose? Because it's good for neuropathic pain, for bone pain, for headache because of intracranial tumors, for because of the peritumoral edema that is reduced. It's good for arthralgia. It's good for spinal metastasis, and even for obstruction of the bowels. The drug of first choice is dexamethasone. Why? Because it has a long duration of action, so you have to give only once a day dose. Its half-life is 36 to 54 hours. Second, it has less mineralocorticoid effects, so less sodium and water retention. And remember to give steroids always in the morning, because otherwise it can cause insomnia at night. Next, please. Now, GABA agonist is another multi-purpose drug like baclofen, particularly when neuropathic pain is associated with spasticity. So dose is 10 mg. We can go up to 30 to 200 mg per day. Okay, but you have to taper it slowly, otherwise seizures can occur. Next, please. Bone pain. Bone pain is another very common cause of pain in cancer patients. It can occur after breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer. So many cancers you can get bone pain, and they are called the skeletal related events. And this pain can be very agonizing. So next, how do you treat bone pain? Next, please. So you can start off with corticosteroids and NSAIDs, or the other drugs are calcitonin. You can give it as an intranasal spray of 200 units per day for 14 days. You can give bisphosphonates like zoledronic acid, 4 mg IV every 3 months, or you can give denosumab. So these two, bisphosphonates and denosumab, they are acting as inhibiting the osteoclastic activity and stimulating the osteoblastic activity. Okay. Then you can also give palliative radiation with strontium or samarium, particularly when you want to give targeted radiation for bone mets. So these are the various ways in which you can treat bone pain. Next, please. Now, pain due to bowel obstruction. For this, you can start off with steroids. You can add an anticholinergic drug like hyoscine butyl bromide or glycopyrrolate, and you can also add a somatostatin analog like octreotide. All these will decrease the intraluminal secretions and allow the peristaltic movement to happen and decrease the bowel edema. Sometimes you can give a combination of all three, like dexamethasone, octreotide, and hyoscine butyl bromide. Next, please. What are the other adjuvant drugs? There are some of them are skeletal muscle relaxants like thiocolchidoside, tizanidine, and all, when there is a lot of muscle spasticity or muscle spasm. Or you can use a neuroleptic agent, particularly when there is delirium and agitation, like olanzapine, sedatives, anxiolytics, laxatives, antibiotics. These are all the other adjuvant drugs to treat the other symptoms of patients with cancer. Next, please. To summarize, the WHO analgesic ladder is a sheet anchor for cancer pain management, but we can also use it, like I said, for other kinds of pain, like chronic non-cancer pain or even for acute pain. Advantages are simplicity, easy implementation, can be used all over the world, even in the remotest corner of the world. And most importantly, it is legitimized the use of opioids in cancer and non-cancer pain. Thank you so much.
Madam talked about NSAIDs, opioids, weak opioids, and the paracetamol. So, if you have any doubts, you can ask. You can unmute and ask.
Hello. Yes, ma'am. Actually, I had a question regarding adjuvants, right? So adjuvants means what all therapeutic modalities can be included. Can you little bit enlighten upon that? Like what will be the specific adjuvants that we can utilize?
Okay. The most commonly adjuvant is some drug that is given along with the primary drug of the analgesic pain ladder, right? Huh? So you
Yes,
can
ma'am.
add an adjuvant at all stages, whether it is stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3. So adjuvant drugs, like I said, is supposing the cancer pain is nociceptive and neuropathic. So the adjuvant you're adding in this patient would be a neuropathic drug, okay, which treats neuropathic pain. So you can add an antidepressant, you can add an anticonvulsant, you can add an NMDA blocker, or you can add a local anesthetic, right?
Okay.
Or maybe even a local anesthetic patch you can add, or a xylocaine infusion or whatever. Supposing the patient has got severe pain along with headache, maybe in tumor, intracranial tumor is there. So now you have to give something that reduces the edema around the metastasis in the brain. So you have to give a steroid. That's a multi-purpose adjuvant. The earlier one was a specific adjuvant. This is a multi-purpose adjuvant, like a steroid. So along with the step 1, patient is having very severe pain. You're giving tramadol for the pain. I mean, not very severe, moderate pain. But because there is a tumor and on the CT scan, you can see that there's a peritumoral edema. So you are adding a steroid like dexamethasone along with the tramadol. Okay, because in cancer patients, brain tumor, you don't give morphine, right? Morphine is one
Yes.
of the contraindications of giving.
Contraindication. Correct.
So you have to either give paracetamol or a tramadol, but you can add, if there is a peritumoral edema on the CT scan, that is the cause of the headache. If you reduce the edema, then you will reduce the headache. So then you add a steroid, very effective to reduce the tumoral edema, peritumoral edema. So these are, what I'm trying to say is the adjuvants are added on. It's not given alone, right? You don't give steroid alone for a peritumoral edema. You have to give an analgesic of the WHO ladder, but you're adding the steroid because it will potentiate the effect of pain relief. So some of the adjuvants do not have primary analgesic properties. For example, patient is not getting sleep at night. Okay. Now, if a person doesn't sleep at night, he's definitely going to feel more pain the next day because lack of sleep and insomnia decreases the threshold of pain. And that patient will be so agitated the next day because of the lack of sleep. So you give a sedative drug or you give a neuroleptic drug so that the patient sleeps well at night, automatically even the pain will come down. So it potentiates the effect of your painkiller.
Okay.
So that is what I mean by adjuvant, that it is not given alone. It is usually added to the WHO step ladder. But if you do not give that adjuvant, your step ladder may not be that good in relieving the patient of the symptoms. You have to add, and it may not be just one adjuvant. You may have to give more than one. You know, it's you can add 2 or 3 adjuvants also at the same time. You may have to give an antidepressant, anticonvulsant. You may even have to give a sedative also, right? So it could be 1 or more adjuvants that are added on to the WHO step ladder.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I just was trying to understand if there is a specific list of adjuvants. Yeah, but now this clarifies.
I've already
Yes.
given the list of adjuvants.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. I am Dr. Gawar from Kashmir. So
Yes, welcome.
in our part of world, the cold has started and it has increased the incidence of pain in the patients who are coming in our general day practice. So I have a question: how long can we give tapentadol and tramadol to a patient for a chronic pain? How long it can be given? How for week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or months?
It can be given even for months, don't worry. Okay, because the side effect profile is, it does not cause any kidney or liver damage. That's a main thing, particularly when people have renal dysfunction or liver dysfunction. Tramadol is relatively safe in these people. And there are patients who can be on it for more than weeks together, no problem. Okay. But you, at the same time, you should also be careful that they do not, you may have to reduce the dose if they have got other comorbidities, but also monitor their liver function and kidney function once in a way. Every 3 months, you can monitor the liver and kidney function. But the main advantage is it can be given for people with renal failure and with liver dysfunction. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are people who are taking these for months together, because there's no other alternative, right? If the patient's having cancer pain, you have to treat them. So
that's what I was asking, ma'am, because we don't have availability of morphine at our hospital, and we are planning to apply for the license, for narcotic license. We have not yet received it.
Okay.
So that's the problem. We don't use morphine in our hospital.
But fentanyl patch is available?
No, ma'am. No. That's not also not available.
Then there's buprenorphine patch is also there. You know that?
Which patch, ma'am?
Buprenorphine patches. Buprenorphine patch is also available, no? It doesn't come under the act, you can get it over the counter also with a prescription. So that is also an opioid patch, but it's unlike fentanyl and morphine, it doesn't require the form. It can be good. I will get it in the chat if you want. Okay, buprenorphine.
Ma'am, please write it in the chat so that we will get it for the patients.
Thank you, ma'am, for a nice presentation. I'm from Bangladesh. I have 2 questions. Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
You are audible.
First question is there any difference in WHO step ladder pain management in pediatric cases? And second question is weak opioid is used in pediatric cases?
I'm not sure about weak opioids being given, but definitely you can give paracetamol. And even NSAIDs can be given in children. But I'm not very sure of because I think Sunil may be able to enlighten, but I've not dealt much with pediatric cancer patients. So I don't know. But I know that morphine can be given intravenously, but I'm not sure whether oral morphine can be given. But definitely paracetamol can be given, like I said, 12 to 50 mg per kg, should not exceed 90 milligram per kg. That can be given, and even Brufen, it can be given in pediatric. But I'm not sure about oral morphine or oral tramadol. I don't know, maybe Sunil will be able to enlighten.
Yeah.
So in
Thank you,
children,
madam.
the WHO analgesic ladder is modified into two-step ladder. So the step 2 is not there. So
Step 2
weak
is not there.
opiates are not used, not advised by World Health Organization for management of pain in children. So low dose strong opioids can be used, and the NSAID which is recommended is ibuprofen.
Yeah, ibuprofen.
No other NSAID has been recommended for management of pain in children, and also paracetamol can be used.
Yes, yes.
But
Paracetamol and Brufen, yeah.
I have seen that in many people use tapentadol, then tramadol in children, even though it is not advised by WHO.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Dr. Lata from Chennai. Can I have a question, please?
Yes, please carry on.
Ma'am, I work in pediatric oncology department. In the last week, we have been managing a 15-year-old boy. He's a case of a metastatic E-wings, multiple skeletal mets. So actually, we have been using tramadol and morphine in pediatrics, ma'am, since last 6 to 8 years in our unit we have been using, and we have not come across major side effects in children. And being pediatrician, we are a bit hesitant to use NSAIDs because of this platelet aggregation effects. But we have always been comfortable with morphine and weak opioids, even in younger children. Ma'am. We have
Very
not
good.
had.
That's good information. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
See, morphine I've used intravenously during anesthesia in children. I've used fentanyl and morphine. I was not sure about oral morphine, but I'm glad to hear that tramadol can be used freely in children.
Yes, ma'am. We do use it, ma'am, TDS. And in our center, we have morphine and fentanyl patch available. It's not a problem at all. But the case that I want to discuss now is after coming to know that he has had a metastatic disease, the family opted for palliative care. So we had advised him on paracetamol, tramadol, and fentanyl patch on OP basis. He was already on these 3 drugs. But in spite of that, he had severe pain. So he came to ER and we had to start him on morphine Q6 early, with which he subsided. As you said, his major issue was he was not able to sleep because of the pain. And the whole family had not slept for maybe a week or so. So as soon as the boy was admitted, we gave him the paracetamol, tramadol, and first dose of morphine. Father, mother, child, all the 3 were sleeping in the next 2 to 3 hours. But the issue...
only thing I want to tell you is, normally we do not combine step 2 and step 3. Because when you're giving morphine, you don't give tramadol along with it. Because like combining a weak and a strong opioid, no? So either you give tramadol or you give morphine along with the drug, but giving all 3 may not be the best option. A small clarification for me.
Yes, ma'am. So, and then we started him on lorazepam and melanoset. Maybe it was because that his pain got reduced, he slept peacefully, or is it because of the anxiolytic? We didn't know.
It's a bidirectional effect, you know.
Yes,
the pain reduces, you sleep well. When you sleep well, the pain further reduces. So it's a bidirectional effect also.
Yes. So now that he got discharged yesterday, we had discharged him again on tramadol, fentanyl patch, and morphine. But still his pain is not reduced. He still has breakthrough pain. So as you said, that the skeletal related events, what could be the next line? Because we don't have too much of time to make a trial. First, we will start on steroids and antiepileptics, then we will go to antipsychotic. Is there any tested method that this is going to be more effective, or it's always a question of trial and error, ma'am, which is going to work more in such cases?
So in such cases, either we can give, one of these bisphosphonates. I don't know about the use of bisphonate. He's 15-year-old, no? So not that small a child, I think.
Yes, ma'am, but endocrinology and bisphosphonates combination, they actually are very reluctant to give, especially when he has multiple lytic lesions all over the body.
Okay.
So we are a bit hesitant. So can he be started on steroids? And what is the availability of that intranasal spray that you were mentioning, ma'am, for calcitonin?
That is calcitonin. That is available. Yes. Gemcal is available. In an adult, it is 200 mics per daily for 14 days.
Okay, ma'am. Can it be used for
we'll have to look it up and see. I'll have to look it up. I'll do that. I'll check out the dose, whether it can be given in children. But I know the adult dose. I don't know whether it is given in children or not.
Because this PNET or Ewing's relapse skeletal bone pains are really pathetic, ma'am. We just don't know how to handle.
I know you can't even give radiation because it is
not
they
localized. Have already received also, ma'am.
And it's not localized, it is generalized.
Yes.
So give it, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So as you said, we were talking about that samarium therapy also. Because he had multiple bony lesions. But the thing is, its effective is not proved in pediatric PNET cases, it seems. So it's more in adult and prostate carcinoma and osteosarcomas and other lung cell carcinomas and breast carcinomas. Though they say that it is given in bony lesions, maybe because of the pathophysiology of PNET, it's not found to be effective. So we still are in the, process of analyzing the next step once he comes back with all this.
I'll just do a little homework and see about how we can give calcitonin in these children, whether it will be effective. Sunil, you have any inputs on this?
I don't have much experience on calcitonin, but I would like to ask Dr. Lata, what is the dose of fentanyl patch he's receiving?
We gave 25 mics, sir.
25 micrograms.
Yes,
that means it is equivalent to 60 milligram of oral morphine per day. So
yes,
I think easily instead of tramadol, why don't you give morphine 10 milligram SOS for breakthrough pain?
Yes, sir. The fentanyl patch is not actually effective for him, sir. It was given first on the OP basis. After that only he came back and we started him on morphine. Okay. And one more issue is he has a urinary retention. He has been catheterized because the mass is compressing on his renal pelvis and he has urinary obstruction also, sir.
Where is his pain actually? Which part?
Sir, he has extensive meds in all the long bones. He has it in the pelvic bone. He has it in the femur, humerus, in the scapula. So any bone you name it, he has meds, sir. As of now, his main pain in the bilateral pelvic region, as well as in the right shoulder and scapula, sir.
Okay. One option would be if methadone is available, you can change it to methadone, I think.
Yes,
which
sir.
might give him relief.
Okay.
Because of
instead of morphine, sir?
Action. Instead of fentanyl and morphine.
Okay. Dose?
Okay, so he's receiving...
he's 49 kg, sir.
Okay, this is the dose is as per the dose of morphine. So it is 60 milligram of oral morphine. So you can, I think you can start 2.5 milligram BD.
Okay, okay, sir.
Sunil, can you just repeat that again, please, what you said?
No, the dose of methadone varies as per the dose of morphine. So less than 60 milligram of oral morphine per day, the methadone recommended dose is 2.5 to 7.5 milligram per day.
Okay.
And if it is 60 to 199, and if the patient is less than 65 years, the ratio is 10:1. And if it is more than 65 years, it is 20:1. And if any patient is taking above more than 200, the conversion rate is 20:1.
So the other thing, Lata, sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The other thing is, why don't you add a neuropathic drug also to this?
Yes,
is he getting any other drug like an antidepressant or an anticonvulsant also?
No, ma'am. Apart from lorazepam, he was not getting anything else.
Because sometimes there could be a neuropathic element
Definitely,
also.
Yes.
So I think, if you can give him a dose of either gabapentin or amitriptyline,
Yes, ma'am.
maybe, it will, if there's a neuropathic element, it will definitely take care of, I'm sure.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Definitely.
you can add that, I feel,
Okay.
and just remember, when you add an antidepressant effect, it doesn't come on immediately. It may take
Takes a
at
week.
1 or 2 weeks or so for that effect to
Yes,
come
ma'am.
on. Okay, so you have to be patient. You can't tell them that immediately relief, but I feel that part also you should take care of, that you should take care of the neuropathic element also.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
And that buprenorphine patch I've just written, the trade name is Buvalar patch. Okay, for the gentleman who asked me that question about buprenorphine, its trade name is Buvalar patch. It comes as 5 milligram and 10 mg patch. So you can start with 5 milligram and then go up to 10 mg. 5 mg releases 2.5 microgram per hour, and 10 mg releases 5 microgram per hour. And that effect is for 1 week. Buprenorphine patch lasts for 1 week. So every week you have to change.
So I think we had a very good discussion, and we will move on to patient stories.
Once again, Sunil, what is the dose of tramadol actually in pediatrics?
Actually, it is not recommended by WHO, but maybe you can use, maybe to start with that, if tablets are available, 25 to 50 milligram.
Okay. There is nothing like a per kg weight as the other drugs.
No,
There is.
Tramadol. Yeah, please.
No, isn't there?
And we use 1 mg per kg per dose, ma'am, usually.
Yeah, 1 mg per kg.
Thank you.
Okay, actually, tramadol is metabolized by an enzyme called cytochrome P2D6, and it shows genetic polymorphism. So many individuals may not metabolize tramadol at all, and so that may not give pain relief in many children. So that's another problem. It's the same problem with codeine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And both are weak opioids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall we move on to patient story, which will be presented by Dr. Seedal? Dr. Seedal?
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, all. Can I share the screen?
Do you want to share, or you want us to share?
Anyhow, no, I will share.
I don't. Can you unshare the screen? Dr. Seedal will share it.
Okay, sir. Sure, sir. Sure.
No, it's still host disabled. Okay, anyways, you can...
Please enable her to share the screen.
It's okay, sir. If
It's enabled.
I'm not...
Ma'am, can you please try again?
Okay. Is screen visible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good afternoon, all, and thank you so much, Mary ma'am. It was such a nice session. Actually, I am very much beginner in palliative care, so please excuse me for my small mistakes also in the presentation. This is a case of 60-year-old male who is already operated case of CA buccal mucosa, and now the patient came with the relapse. So the presenting complaints are he has ulcer over left cheek since 3 months and pain at ulcer site since 1 week. And because of that pain, he is not able to have solid liquids orally since 1 week. History of illness. He is a 60-year-old male, known case of CA buccal mucosa, which was squamous cell carcinoma, operated in the February 2012. And for that same thing, he has been undergone wide local excision with modified radical neck dissection. Now he is presented with the ulcer over left cheek, which is painful, foul smelling, fungating, and having purulent discharge. Patient had limited mouth opening since the past surgery, and now because of pain, painful ulcer, he is not able to open a mouth sufficiently and have anything orally. And overall, he has lost his weight, generalized weakness. He is he was chronic tobacco chewer, which he stopped since February 2012. He doesn't have any other major systemic illness. On examination, he is thin built, a febrile pulse rate 88 per minute, blood pressure 100 by 60 mmHg, no pallor present, and other systemic examination is within normal limit. Local examination, ulcer on left cheek, which is tender, size approximately 3 by 4 centimeter, everted indurated age, having the purulent foul smelling discharge. Basic routine investigation has been done in which he has the hemoglobin of 8 gram percent, little elevated leukocyte count, and albumin is of 2 gram. Rest are not very much significant investigation. For medication, he has been given for paracetamol and NSAID for pain, and antibiotics started for the ulcer. Rilstib has been put for the feeding, and he may be planned for the feeding Jejunoswami. Psychological aspect, he is old age, 60 years old, and he and his wife both are manual laborer. They don't have any other kids or anybody to support in the family, and plus that foul smelling discharge and appearance, overall he has the he facing social isolation, plus due to poor generalized condition, not able to do the job properly, so ending in losing the job. And now the wife is the sole earning member now. Main concern for him is the primary pain, the relapse itself, then a no oral intake, economical constraint, and the social isolation. He cannot go out and mix normally. Summary of the patient: 60-year-old male with relapse of the squamous cell carcinoma of the buccal mucosa with painful ulcer over the chin. Discussion point. So, as I said, I'm very much beginner. So, how stepwise we should approach this patient for the palliative care? What can be done for his economical issue, which is actually such problem is very commonly seen in all the patient coming to the government setup, all the most common Indian scenario. And is there any solution for this social isolation per se? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Seethal. So these are real problems which many patients face. So I would like to ask the group to comment on the questions that Dr. Seethal raised. Anybody can unmute and speak.
May I ask Mary ma'am that, like, if such patient come to our clinic, now from starting from ABCD, how to do, like, he has already been operated for that, so he has been referred to the palliative care. He's uh, for pain and all, we will give the according to WHO ladder. What are the other modalities we also take care for the palliative care patient along with this?
Sunil, can I just
Yeah.
answer?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, can we come to the gallery if you don't mind? I mean, or we can keep this on, no problem,
No,
no problem.
screen can be off, no problem.
So basically, you want to, like I said, to apply the WHO ladder, first you have to assess the pain, what is the severity of the pain. So did you mention the visual analog VAS score of this patient?
No,
NRS?
sir. Not
So
actually.
that is important. Is it mild, moderate, or severe?
Okay.
See, one is mouth opening is restricted, that you had already mentioned, but also severity of the pain has to be analyzed, number one, by asking him. See, he being a laborer, you ask him, show him a scale, he will not understand. Instead, you say, in 1 rupee, how much pain it is there. That they will always be able to tell you. In Hindi, we say, 1 rupiya mein kitna hai? You know, that means in 1 rupee, is it 50 paisa, 25 paisa, 75 paisa, like that. Okay, that they will always be able to tell. Even illiterate people can tell you how much pain it is there. Huh? That is one. Second is, you have to see whether there's a neuropathic component to this pain. For that, how do you check? You have to ask what is the kind of pain that he's having. Is it a sharp pain? Is it a dull pain? Is it a burning pain? Is it a pain that is causing electric current like shocks? Because if you have an oral ulcer, it may be touching on one of the nerves and causing shock, like trigeminal neuralgia. So you have to assess that. Also, you have to feel and see, like on touch, feel the skin and see whether there is pain on touch. Okay, that is called allodynia. Okay, or when you're touching, does he feel an abnormal sensation? That is called dysesthesia. Or a pinprick is causing more pain than normal. That is called hyperalgesia. So these are the things by which you know whether it is a neuropathic component is there or not. Okay, so there is a scale also for assessing neuropathic pain called the Dolor Neuropathic DN4. So by applying that, you can also know whether it is a neuropathic pain or not. Because then you have to know whether there's a neuropathic component also along with the nociceptive component, in which case you may have to add either gabapentin or an antidepressant or both, right? Along with the WHO step ladder, whatever you're giving, right? So if you know that the pain is very severe, then you may have to start on oral morphine in this case. That is, if it is more than 8, not responding to your paracetamol, then you may have to go on to the step 3 of the ladder and add on a neuropathic drug if the neuropathic pain, features of neuropathic pain are there. And then in addition, because of the oral ulcers, you have to. So basically, this is what you need to do, when you want to assess pain, you have to see whether there's a neuropathic component. And if there are oral ulcers, how do you treat the oral ulcers? So the pain due to the oral ulcers, how you give it. Like I have a patient known to me in which they say coconut oil, 2 to 3 teaspoons with 1 or 2 drops of clove oil. You rinse the mouth for about 10 minutes. I believe it will be effective in relieving the pain due to the oral ulcer. Although there are other things like applying Zyte and local anesthetic and all those things. But this is one simple thing which anybody can do. It's like a home remedy for this oral ulcers.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sunil, anything you have to say to this?
Dr. Seetal, actually, did Mary Madam answer your question? I didn't actually get what is meant by stepwise palliative care approach.
Primary, we are looking for this pain management first of all, and second, economical issue, social isolation. As sir said previously, that having palliative care is not only relieving the pain per se. We have to give psychological, emotional, all the well-being should be there. Like overall.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to look into all the aspects of suffering. But you have to ask the patient about their primary concern. This patient has pain, but sometimes the economical problem might be the biggest concern for them than pain. We don't know. So we have to ask them and they prioritize the problems as per the patient. We are not the people who are prioritizing their concerns. The patient has to prioritize. So definitely we have to take care of the physical aspects to improve the quality of life. There is no doubt. But as you told, we have to also look into all the aspects of suffering, and then you try to address them as far as possible. That's all what we can do. Sometimes patients. I have actually worked in another institution, and we did a survey in about more than 1,500 patients who was receiving palliative care from our end. And we saw that the biggest concern for patients is physical problems, followed by financial problems. That was the second major concern for the patient. So that is one of the main problems that many patients and families face.
As this patient is laborer and having basically earning issue right now, so it might be is the first issue, right? Maybe I didn't prioritize.
See,
Yeah.
there is what is called total pain. I think you're familiar with that, Sheetal.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Total pain was first, the concept was brought about by Dame Cicely Saunders, the founder of palliative care. In 1960, she told that pain is not just physical pain, but there is psychological pain, social pain, and spiritual pain. Social will also include financial. Okay, so that is called total pain. So you need to address not just the physical aspect, but you need to address all the aspects for them to get relief of pain. So that's called total pain management. It may not be possible that to address all that, but at least by listening to them and empathizing with them to a great extent, you can, you must read about it, about Dame
Yes.
Saunders, about the article that she wrote, beautiful article about one girl in UK who had pain with so much of financial and social problems, and she has actually quoted that lady in that particular article, and that summarized the whole of the total pain by what she said, you know, that I'm having pain but my husband has to earn, and there's no one to be with me, but you know, so that is what is called total pain. You may not be able to address his financial aspects, but by just listening to him and showing empathy, you won't believe that goes a long way in treating their psychological issues also.
Thank you, ma'am. Surely I will go through that.
Sunil,
Uh,
regarding the
yeah.
foul smelling thing, do you have anything for that? The foul smelling in the mouth, is there anything that your nurses and all do for that?
Yeah, foul smelling. I think we have a class on that, but for the completion's sake, foul smell can be treated in many ways. So there are various protocols being used. One is mainly used medication is local application of metronidazole, but people also use systemic metronidazole. So you can give 400 milligram PID for 5 days, followed by maybe 200 to 400 milligram daily, uh, lifelong. So that is one protocol, but many people apply only locally metronidazole. And if the metronidazole powder is unable to reach into the ulcer, then maybe metronidazole irrigation, injection can be irrigated into the wound. So that's also another option. Um, and keep the mouth clean with normal saline or homemade saline. Patients may not be able to buy normal saline, so we can make homemade saline also. And cleaning and dressing with homemade saline is also very important. To keep it covered is also another important thing. Otherwise, the flies will come and lay eggs, which will hatch into larvae, which are known as maggots. So that also we have to educate the patient and family. So at the dressing, during dressing, patient can have pain. If it is only local pain, maybe you can apply either lignocaine or bupivacaine locally. Or if the patient has severe pain, you may give some systemic medications like morphine 1 hour before dressing.
The ulcer is on the surface of the cheek, or the inner aspect, buccal aspect, or the outer aspect?
Outer aspect, buccal. I mean, outer.
Outer, not the
Outer,
buccal.
not the buccal.
So you must look for the neuropathic element by touching the skin and seeing whether whether the skin touching is also causing pain. That is a very typical thing of neuropathic pain. They won't even allow you to touch the cheek. Okay. In that case, definitely you have to add on the neuropathic medication.
So I would like to ask the group, many of you are working in palliative care. What would you do for economical problems of the patient? Anybody can speak.
What we commonly do is, there'll be some like social organizations non-voluntary groups who will be willing to help, and there are people who contribute a definite amount, a small amount for palliative care every month or every year, so that they can be used for these purposes. In many places they have, in our part of the district like Malappuram, there are a lot of social organizations which they donate a definite amount of palliative care in every month or every year, which usually we uses for these purposes. Like every year we give this much money for a patient to take care of their social thing.
So Dr. Damkumari says they have social service department. So thank you for your comments. Anybody else has any more idea?
Hello.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in our hospital in Nepal, in Green Pastures Hospital, what we have is a social service department, and so the people who are financially very poor or weak, so we will evaluate and assess those ones, and if they are genuinely in need, then we have a hospital charity, and we have also some fund with them, and we provide them with the charity.
Okay. Thank you. So the important thing is the resources, if not enough, to cater for all the patients' needs. So many patients will have many financial problems, including lack of debt. So what we usually do is we will cater for the immediate management of the patient and family. We don't give money usually. We give food kits, free medicines, and if patient is in a rented house, the rent will be paid, and some rehabilitation program for either for the patient or for the spouse will be arranged, so that they will be able to earn lifelong. That's what we usually do for these patients who are very financially poor. Rehabilitation is another area which we have to be very careful. We should see the house and the surroundings. Only then we have to decide about what type of rehabilitation should we provide. Hello, madam.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything?
So I think, yeah, that is particularly now with this corona, it has become even more problem. The financial problems have increased only, have further compounded. People are losing jobs, and it has, what was there before, now it's even worse. So it's so difficult to address the financial part of it. But I'm so glad there are organizations like Pallium, and in Delhi we have Can Support, which are providing free services to people, even in below poverty line people. So these are the NGOs, like these are the ones that are the hope of people like that. I'm full marks to them. I mean, I must say, like in Delhi, we have Can Support. They are also going to house to so many people below the poverty line and in the slums, and providing free treatment, like what Pallium is doing in Kerala. So thanks to that.
So the other question was, is there any solution for social isolation? So I think in this patient, probably the patient would not like to go out because of maybe because of ulcer on the cheek, and also because of the foul smell. And the people who are coming in to their house also, they may also may not like what is seen in front of them, or the foul smell. So this might be the problems that usually that can cause social isolation in this patient. So what can be done for this social isolation? Anybody?
Sir, as you said, taking care of the ulcer itself is going to solve majority of the issue, no, sir?
Yeah.
You give
So,
antibiotics, you give local measures.
yeah.
So once the wound is kept hygiene, I mean, to the maximum extent possible, I think that should solve a majority of the complaints.
Yeah, that will give some relief for the patient and also for the family members and for those people who are also coming to the house. Um, but I think basically the friends and relatives should be educated regarding
Exactly.
the cause of what is happening with the patient, and he is suffering from this isolation because of this ulcer. And if you don't go near him, he will feel that he is someone who need to be isolated from the society. So this should start from the family and should then move into the relatives and friends, neighbors, etc. So there should be proper education for the community also. Madam?
Yeah, but that is easier said than done.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I
But,
have one small query because we are from pediatrics. I mean, we are very, what you say, we are not at all exposed to adult cancer patients. So just wanted to know, in such cases where they have this oral malignancies causing disfigurement and all, is there something cosmetic, I mean, which is not going to cure the problem, but at least they can have a more comfortable way of living by covering it or some patch or something like that? I mean, is it available? Just nothing, no?
No idea.
No,
No,
I haven't
because
seen. So proper dressing is something which we can advise the patient.
okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes, Dr. Mahesh speaking from Rajasthan. So I am head and neck surgeon. So whenever there is a huge defect, we use free flap to cover the defect. And if patient is very much debilitated, then we do the local flap, or we do the regular dressing 4 hourly or 6 hourly and let the granulation come. And then after that we will do the grafting. So there is no query about the covering the defect. Any extent we can cover the wound, but the problem is the other issues, how we can treat the patient, because these are the palliative patients. So the covering of the that particular wound is not at all an issue. But these free flap on and big surgeries, they require 3 to 4 or 6 hour or 8 hours sometimes. So that is the main issue. That's why we don't do that much of big surgery to the palliative patients. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what really happens. Even though maybe head and neck surgeons or surgery people want to do surgeries, but then the problem of the prognosis, financial issues all come into play. So mostly the patients are left only with cleaning and dressing. So anybody else has any more comments? Madam, do you have any more comments?
I think excuse me, Dr. Mahesh
Yes.
here.
Yes,
I think
Dr.
that this today's topic is pain. So this case presentation that should be more specific to the pain, and the pain management is already done by some physician. And then how can we improve the pain relief to the patient? I think that must be there, because there is, I don't think this presentation is bad, is okay, but I think the pain is our topic. So already we have applied some drugs to the patients, and the patient is not relieving with the pain, and we had given the morphine, or we given the radiation, that type of presentation must be there, so we can learn the pain more effectively. I think so.
Yeah, it is ideal, Dr. Mahesh, but I think we have a group where we have asked each people to come forward to present a patient story that is corresponding to that session. But I think some of the places are still vacant, and I request all of you to present a patient story which would be relevant to that topic if possible. And many of you are not working in palliative care, and so you may not be able to get the proper patient story also, that we understand. But as far as possible, I request all of you to take a proper patient story.
No, actually, that is very good. Everything is going good, but I think we have to improve the means discussion, so the topic is relevant to the particular point. So thank you.
Yeah, that your suggestion is very valuable, and we usually tell to this doctors to present this type of patient story. Thank you.
Sir, this is Dr. Sudha.
Yes, Dr. Sudha.
I want to know if is any wound care is also involved in the palliative care team regularly, or
Yes, it is. Wound care is usually part of palliative care, and many of the patients whom we or whom we have, they have many types of wounds. Maybe the most common wound is pressure sore, then fungating wounds, then many types of ulcers due to
yes. So in this
patients,
case,
yeah.
any kind of wound care has to be addressed on a continuous basis. That gives the
Yes,
confidence to the patient.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand the foul swelling cannot be done with a wash or anything like that. And one family member needs to be trained with the wound care. And I don't know how things work here. I mean, from that, do we have any kind of a, like, if not from a, because in other countries, the social services will take care to visit that particular place and kind of address a social issue once in a year only, something like that. So I don't know how these things are in palliative care. Is there any, I mean, the population is huge, not everybody can do a visit like that, and I totally understand. I'm just asking as a new to palliative care here in India.
Yeah, I understand. Usually what we do is, we usually, as you told, we teach one of the family member who is always with the patient how to take care of the wound. So we have to educate the primary caregiver so that even though we are not attending the patient every week or every day, the patient's caregiver will be able to do it properly. So first we will show them how to do the wound dressing, and next time we will ask them to assist us so that next time they can do independently. And whenever they have doubts, they will call us. So we also give them our phone number, and if needed, a video consultation is also provided for the patient.
Okay, thank you. Now, this social issue that the doctor was asking for help, is it financial and social, like kind of, social, comfort where people are isolation kind of a thing. So for that, I mean, what do you usually, I mean, awareness programs in public, or I mean, sorry, I'm asking a very question.
I understand. So we do a lot of awareness programs, and in addition, we whenever we go to some places, we have volunteers. So we will ask them to accompany us, or usually they accompany us, and they will be able to make a network of people around the patient's home, so that there will be more awareness regarding these issues. So this is usually taken care of by the volunteers.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I think we will wind up the session for today. So thank you, Dr. Mary Abraham, for being with us today, and Dr.
Sheetal.
Sorry, I
Sheetal,
forgot her
Sheetal.
name. Sorry, Dr. Sheetal. Dr. Sheetal, for your patient story, and which were very relevant points which many patients face. And thank you all for your suggestions and comments. We'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
इसमें क्यों बुलाया? खेल रहा था। लूना, मेरे को बाहर जाना है। अरे नहीं।